Hello and welcome back. This is video 15A in the Flow Certified Coach training course. We're going to be looking at the 4D model today, and this is tile number 13. And I'm really excited to have with us today Brian Farish, and I'm going to have Brian introduce himself on the next slide.
Hi there. My name is Brian Farish, and I'm been working in IT, information technology, as a information architect, doing enterprise information integration for 25 years. I've been in IT for 35 years. Met Andy and Dan and all the Coleman brothers about 25 years ago, and have been really blessed by the relationship. We started talking about the early aspects of flow. Dan and Andy and Ted shared the VSPT pattern to me, and I've wandered off on my own, and they wandered off on their own, and they evolved it into something really wonderful. And I've used it as a tool for all these years to organize my thinking and to drive the projects and to help provide some structure. One of the key aspects of the whole flow approach is the 4Ds that we'll talk about today. I'm particularly obsessive about the define aspect of it, because that's the process, the deliverable, the task that has always been one of the most heavily resisted in organizations that I've worked with, but that also is kind of an indicator that there is a lot of value there. There's no free lunch, and the work that you invest in the definitions pays off in so many different ways that over the years it has proven to be a critical aspect of it. The 4D model is a really interesting iterative looping type approach, where you get the team together, you get the folks together, the business experts, you establish the definitions for the key terms in your scope. And one of the interesting things that I've discovered is it's always the one that people snort when you ask about it. Say, well, what's the definition of word? And you'll get a snort, go, well, everybody knows what that is, until you get everyone around the table to start providing those definitions. And then you start discovering, well, no, that's not quite right. Well, no, that's not quite right. And all of those little misalignments in an IT context lead to serious implementation problems down the road, bugs and rework. But operationally and organizationally, they lead to miscommunications and inefficiencies in running the business and driving forward. And one of the most fascinating things to me that Ted and Andy discovered was the harmony of the team, the strength of the intangible cohesiveness of the team is enhanced by the definitions. That they being able to clearly communicate is like oil on gears. I mean, it makes all the discussions go smoother. Part of the process of getting to those clear definitions is the distillation, is making sure that you've got them right, is making sure that they have the accurate meaning, that they are precisely what you need to do. Again, I come at it from an IT perspective. In order to edit data, in order to effectively use data, you have to know precisely what is supposed to be in that bucket. Ambiguities and synonyms will kill you in an IT project, but they'll kill you in policies. Ask any lawyer in contracts if semantic precision is important or not. So the distillation process of making sure that the definition can stand up under scrutiny is key. Once you've got that, once you've got a solid set of terminology and concepts and agreement on them, you can begin to deliver on what it is that you want to do. And this is another thing, I've discussed this with Andy. This is one of those interesting places where definitions and context are key. I, in my mind, can flip, deliver, and drive because I'm a project-oriented thinker. I'm a fixed point delivery kind of guy. So I'm driving to deliver a a particular change in thinking, a particular product, a particular piece of software. So for me, when I think about it, I think define, distill, drive, and deliver. And the key difference in that definition of it and that view of it and the way it's laid out in flow is that flow is this, or stated in this way, it's aligned with programs and with ongoing living value provision to the organization. So you define, you distill, you deliver the concept, you deliver the group, you deliver the process, you deliver the whatever it is, and then you drive that, you drive forward. And the other key aspect of this, these are all iterative. We'll get into that probably on the next slide a little bit. But as I was thinking through this today, the iterations and the what's the word? The inheritance, the fact that VSPT can live inside of itself, the child-parent possibilities of the VSPT pattern. It's kind of surprising to me as I've looked through these different ideas, how pervasive that iterative, that cycling concept is through so many of these different approaches and patterns. Within definition, there's you can pull VSPT within the definitions. What are your visions for this step? What are your visions for distillation? You get to a point where the granularity is so fine that you don't formally, probably formally want to document all of that. But between define and distill, there's a feedback loop. There's feedback loops all the way, as well as the overall circular process, looping, iteration pattern to it. Exactly. So let's, and so I've jumped ahead a little bit on this, but this is the key concept. One of the things that I love so much about flow is just that applicability across all of the organization. You can do all of these things at the organization, at the product, at the team, at the individual level. And the definitions are so key across all of these. The best functioning organizations I've ever been in are the ones that, whether it's a perfect solution or not, and we all know that it isn't because we're human beings and these are put together by human beings, the companies that have at least acknowledged the need for and taken the effort to provide a glossary, a business glossary for their key terms, are the ones that seem to move everything just a little bit faster. And depending on the focus that you put into the glossaries and the definitions and getting everyone to at least speak the same language, it pays off. It pays off in dividends in so many different ways. The problem is their opportunity costs. It reduces bugs, it reduces miscommunications, it reduces errors, and it's hard to measure that. So it's hard to quantify that and go back to executives and get them to buy in. But that's part of the job of the flow pattern, the flow model, is to get buy-in and get people to thinking this way, and to understand that a clear definition for the vision, a clear definition for where you want to go, what you want to do, and what you want to deliver is a critical first step. But not only that, the definition of all of the key terms that you're going to use to interact with each other and to move toward that vision is vital. Originally, when Ted and Andy started sharing these concepts with me, VSPT was vision, strategy, projects, and tasks. And this transition to people and tasks is fairly brilliant, and it also the line also helps delineate to me that that's where I live. And
living on the edge.
Yeah, living on the edge, about to fall off. That jump between the VS and the PT is kind of where I live. There are Ted used to scold me every time I brought up the Zachman framework, but it's kind of how my brain works. And there's a jump in the language of leadership to the language of management that happens in my mind, on that line
Yeah.
between vision, strategy, and people and tasks. And in my mind, that's the jump between the top two layers of the Zachman framework and the bottom. Has he got four now?
Yeah.
Three now? The implementation layers. So you've got the vision and strategy, which correspond pretty well to the top two layers. You got the contextual and conceptual. So you're talking about the language of leadership, what's important to them and how do they talk about it. Then you jump down, and in IT systems, when you jump that next level down, you start talking about logical implementations. You've got constraints on how you talk about it, but it becomes much more line manager, to put it in another word. It's how the individuals talk about doing their jobs as opposed to talking about what you want to get done. And in IT systems, you start talking about how you want to physically organize the data on disk or in the cloud or wherever you want it, how you've got a physical constraint at that level. Above that line, in the language of leadership, you've got what do I need to know? So it's very much a change from a requirement, an information requirement, what do I need to know, down to how am I going to store it? Those definitions help drive that jump between those two layers. It's impossible to establish an equivalency if you don't know what the meaning on both ends of the flow or the idea transfer. At the end of the day, communication is all about getting an idea from my head and clearly placing the same idea into your head or into the other person's head. IT systems, that's the same. They have the same mission. It's transferring ideas from one person's head into another person's head, whether that's transmitted over the Ethernet, whether it gets persisted in some data store or implemented in some code. That's the fundamental thing. And ideas are captured and communicated between humans in definitions and semantics.
The door just popped open, so that startled me because we have almost a gale force storm going out here today.
Goodness. What's the temperature?
It's been dropping. It started at 9 Celsius, and the last I checked, it was down to 7. But it was snowing just before we started. By the way, when you were talking about the Zachman formula, you mentioned concepts and what was the other one? Connections?
Contextual and conceptual.
Okay, context and
Think at the contextual level for the who, what, where, when, how, why. You produce a one-page summary. It's the executive. Contextual is like the executive summary. Conceptual, in my mind, is where you start defining the individual nuggets of information that you want to know. So it's just increasing.
Yeah, the thing that's really interesting about that is Dr. Sharon Bowman, who wrote the book Training from the Back of the Room, and another book called Brain Science, talks about connections, concepts, and she has this whole 4C model. And when you were explaining that in the Zachman formula or framework, it just hit me that, wow, came from two different completely areas, and they hit on basically the same thing.
Right.
And so I that was something that just sort of jumped out at me. And I went, "Wow, that's really cool."
Yeah, Charles the concepts. That's one of the powers of, and I'm not going to make this about the Zachman framework, but
no, it's okay.
One of the power, much like flow, and much like all of this, the powerful ideas that are simple and that apply so broadly and are so flexible. They persist and they live and they grow, and that's one of the things that I love about flow, and I love about all of the different patterns that you guys have come up with. They're they have been distilled down to their most finite granular increment of value, and they're tools that can be used across so many different contexts.
And I liked what you said about, for example, over here with drive and deliver, that you can flip them around. Originally, we had arrows, and it was almost a linear process. But many years ago, we just took away the arrows because, just like you said, you could be at distill and you got to jump back to definition, or you could be at deliver and you got to jump back to distill, or you could be attempting to drive and do retrospectives
Right.
and get it out through the organization, and you realize somebody just said, oh, by the way, can we make this one small change? And that's a trigger for people knowing that we have a new definition.
Yeah.
And by definition, when you get a new definition, that means you now have a new work assignment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we've talked about Agile quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I have softened my stance on Agile. I was an Agile victim in the earliest days,
Oh, sorry, man.
because when they first started promulgating Agile, I developed a nervous tick over the sneering about no BDUF and we don't need all that documentation. Let's just get the coding. And there were a lot of sins created with the Agile blessing over them. And I know from talking to you and to talking to Ted over the years that there's been some realization. Well, whether in the broader Agile community, I know that you guys have had to live the applications of enough to know that there are mitigating practices that need to be applied on top of it in order to put it in context. Back to the contextual and the conceptual, there's a context in which the iterations need to have. From my perspective, and I don't want to take this off too deep on Agile because I still want to go through it a little bit. I don't have a whole lot to say about deliver and drive because we've already said it. If it's a product, you deliver it and then you drive it. If it's a program, you drive it and then
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, it's a program. If
now
it's a
you're
program, you
directing
deliver,
flows.
you drive it. If it's a project, you drive to deliver.
Yeah.
But it's critical that you have at least the broader context defined before you start iterating through these things. There are certain key types of projects for which Agile and that sprint/iteration model are just gold. Iterating user interfaces, developing user interfaces, you can't come up with anything better because you get it in front of them, they look at it and they react.
Yeah.
Possibly even evolving business processes. Okay, we got it up. How's it running? The place that you will die, and you will die in screaming agony, and people will be calling you evil names for the rest of history, is if you rush out and start building data solutions and try to iterate a data solution. Because the problem with the data solution and data architecture is it's the foundation on which everything else is built.
Yep.
So you start iterating that user interface on top of that data structure. And one of the ways that this was mitigated in theory early on was they kept talking about refactoring. We'll refactor the database, and there's going to be magical tools that are going to let us evolve in it. And they probably have improved them since then. Yeah. But what happened in reality was that you came up, if you rush through the definition phase, which is what they always did because they want to start coding, so they skip definitions. You rush through the definition phase, you start building user interfaces and reports, and now through this distillation process, a new bit of knowledge requiring a change to the physical data structures comes up. And as recently as just a couple of 3 years ago, I've had teams commit to. I understand the data is going to change. The first time it happens, we can't do that because I'll have to change all of the code. So it's important to spend time on that definition phase because you drive out misunderstandings, you drive out assumptions, and if you get it documented, then everyone can share the same vision of how a particular concept is implemented and used and what it means, and everything just moves faster.
Very much so.
I think I've pretty well bored you to death for long enough on that.
No, but it's really good, and I love what you said about Agile because over time, Ted and I and many others realized we're not Agile purists, we're pragmatists. And we found very quickly that Scrum works well in some circumstances. Kanban works well in other circumstances.
Mhm.
XP works better in another circumstance.
Absolutely.
And all of
Right
a
tool,
sudden,
right tool, right job.
yeah. And so, but from a program view, as you're looking at that, all of a sudden, when you start having multiple methodologies, then it's asymmetric what you're trying to manage from a program view. And if
Hmm.
you're dealing with asymmetric methods and asymmetric data and asymmetric reporting,
Hmm.
it can be a nightmare. And so
Yeah.
the scaled agile frameworks try to get all the teams using Scrum, but as you just rightly pointed out, Scrum works well in some instances. In other instances, you're probably not going to use it.
There
And
has
I
to be a
can,
roadmap. It
yeah,
goes back to vision, and I guess it boils back down to what I'm saying is that you've got to know the vision.
yeah,
And the question is how much detail you want to put into defining that vision, back to definitions,
yeah,
in order to drive what happens within in those scrums, in those iterations within
exactly.
the pursuit of that vision. So uh, that's another unifying concept that flow provides is you don't take out agile doesn't mean you take off without a vision. You don't build a skyscraper with agile.
Yeah.
You have to have a clear path to what you want to deliver
Yep.
before you begin iterating. So
Yeah, you have to have a few
you don't have
architectural
to have the details
drawings.
nailed down, but yeah.
Well, and we actually have a company in Gothenburg. One of their program leads is actually starting to apply flow to the building of a very huge apartment complex, probably $250 million or Swedish crowns. So, relatively large project. It might have even have been bigger. It might have been like $250 million range because it was around. It was a lot of apartments in any case, and he had the exact same questions. He's like, we have all these things that we have to document, all these things that we have to do, and we were saying, look,
Blueprints.
it's a myth to say that we don't have documentation. It's a myth to say that we don't plan. It's how we document and how we plan, and we're using flow above whatever methodology you're using at the team level to help the team get to higher performance. And
And
so,
as long as your attitude toward documentation within Agile is the anti-pattern to one of the things that Dan I think I saw it when I was working with Dan on the project was they had one of these we'll go nameless consulting firms come in and
we both know who it is.
and do some work, and they had an entire shelf. I mean, probably
Oh, it was
okay. I'll be
volumes.
concerned. I'll be conservative. Say 4 feet. I think it's more like 6 feet of, of
File after,
binders.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was
of
amazing. I
binders,
remember
and
that.
no one, you know. But okay, I won't overstate at that point. But I don't know that I ever saw anyone ever go to those binders for anything. I
No,
mean, it was their deliverable, and here you go. Here's a lot of paper.
yeah,
Uh,
read it and
so
weep.
yeah, I get that. You get the antithesis to that is a data dictionary.
Yeah,
A data dictionary is something that gets used uh, when it's created, gets
yeah,
used repeatedly. It gets used repeatedly by the development teams. Gets used repeatedly by business analysts, data scientists. 80 to 90% of data scientists' time is spent cleansing data.
oh
You,
yeah,
you think it
oh
would be
yeah,
useful having data dictionary? So
yep, oh
uh,
yeah,
that level of documentation and the struggle that I've had over the years, again, being the definition obsessive that I am, is that the data dictionary and that blueprint that you've got to have for those large projects got thrown out initially as BDUF uh, artifacts. And I think that this rational approach, this lessons learned
yeah,
approach to agile is much more delivery focused and lets you get uh, do the things that you need to do up front, establish the vision, do the define, distill, deliver, drive cycle within the vision phase to get
Yeah.
that stuff ready, and then go with it.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, we're coming into the final slide.
So the 4D model, you know, it for me it's a 2+2 model. As I've said, I from my perspective and the way that I've applied it, I just obsess over define and distill, because I know that the deliver and drive phases just, you know, it's oil and gears to me.
Yeah.
Define and distill is the oil, and the deliver and drive are the gears. And
Exactly.
the more work you put into define and distill, the smoother the deliver and drive are going to run, the more product you're going to deliver, whatever product is, product being a service or a tangible, whatever it is. And it's essential that you don't rush past the define phase. And that's the define and distill are always the at-risk youth in a project.
Yeah.
You know, it's always, it seems to me like it's always the one that gets overlooked, because from an IT perspective, and I'm sure within organizations, there's always that assumption that, well, everybody knows what that means.
Yeah.
And again, I will tell you, my heuristic is the ones that you are going to have the longest and loudest and most bitter conflicts over are the ones that everyone knows what that means. Everybody knows what a customer is. Yeah, they do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I've watched arguments between executives that went on for 45 minutes over the definition of red, amber, and green.
Oh, so to go back to a previous engagement with Ted, went in and Ted brought me in to talk about order. And 45 minutes would have been a drain for this organization. They had been fighting about order. They didn't know it. They had been fighting about their order process for weeks, and it was taking them. It was a web turnup company, and so an application service provider is what they called it back then, and they had this nifty technology that should have spun up a website in minutes, and it was taking them 5 weeks to get one of those things provisioned from order, quote unquote order, to delivery. And so we got in this room and started talking to them about it. And I walked in. This was my first day. Ted brought me in as a sacrificial lamb, you know, threw me in front of these wolves and said, see what you can get worked out. And so I said, well, you know, I sensed some conflict. And one of the things a meeting facilitator expert years ago said in facilitating meetings, define. Yeah. And so I grabbed onto that life preserver in my mind and said, all right, well, let's define. Let me write up here on the board what order is. And the first guy piped up, the guy in charge of sales piped up and said, well, an order is just a signature on a napkin. From the other end of the table, the senior vice president of delivery stood up, and he was a tall man, stood up, slammed both hands down on the table and said, no, it is not. And I just smiled and looked over at Ted. Ted smiled and looked at me. I said, well, I think we've got a place to start. So we spent some time going through it, and it turned out there was a lot of collateral material for an order to be turned up that needed to be included. From the sales guy's perspective, he wanted the signature on the napkin to get his people paid. Yeah. So we went through it, got the things clearly defined what a fully workable order was, and trimmed that delivery cycle down from 5 weeks to less than 5 days. Yeah. So it had huge cash flow implications on the business, but it's one of those words. Everybody would talk about, well, the order this, the order that, and the other person is hearing, you know, the first person saying the order this, the order that. The second person is hearing the order this, the order that. You know, and they never stopped to get that clarification. And so anger built up, resentment built up, friction built up, and progress stopped. So I go back to my definitions being the lubricant. If you can get clear concepts.
What you just described there is beautiful, because I don't know if you ever heard Ted share the story about the phrase, "I have nothing to wear." Had you ever heard that
No,
one?
I
Okay,
don't think I've heard that one.
because this was the other way that we tried to help people understand what we're talking about when we're talking about definitions and precision in our communication. I loved how you said it, semantic something, where semantic preciseness.
Mhm.
It was just beautiful the way you phrased it. But it's as simple as this: if I walk into my closet upstairs and say I have nothing to wear,
It means it's an empty
what's the
closet.
next step on the agenda?
Acquire
Do
something.
laundry, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now, if my wife walks in to that closet and says, I have nothing to wear, what
Well,
do I know is the next step on the agenda? It's definitely not laundry. We're going shopping.
right.
Because whatever was there is the wrong color, it's out of season, it doesn't fit right anymore, whatever. But exact same phrase, two
And you
completely
also know
different.
not to say, let's do laundry, because that,
Oh, that would.
well, Zig
I,
Ziglar used to talk about the power of words. He said, there's a significant difference
yeah,
between saying, honey, you're a vision, and honey, you're a sight. So it's very much the same thing about the power of
exactly.
words and definitions.
Super. It's been really great having you with, and just so that the people watching this video and listening to this know, Brian was actually there way back in the beginning, 25 years ago, in these projects from 90 to 95, and I've always deeply appreciated Brian's insights, especially when it comes to definition. I learned so much about definitions and how to pursue getting good definitions, because these days they talk about product backlog, so I'll just throw it in the product backlog if it's agile. But what they're missing is that product backlog had better encompass the entire vision. The entire vision better be in that backlog, because if it's not in there and well defined, you're already sunk. And it doesn't matter if you're
Absolutely.
doing agile or a work breakdown structure in traditional. Either way, definitions will make or break you. And that's
Absolutely.
been my mantra now for almost 25 years, regardless of what people are using at the team level to get the work done.
Right. Absolutely. Well, just to speak back to that it's been 25 years now, Andy. Um, and it's been a blessing. That my association with the Common family has been one of the biggest professional blessings
Yeah.
uh, I've had, and
Thanks.
it's meant a lot to me, and it's been a very much a two-way street on the learning and the sharing. I've learned so much from all the Common brothers,
Yeah.
and so
Thanks.
I'm really proud to have seen what you guys did with VSPT. I still remember those flip charts in that little house in that living room as you're grinding through it. But I had no idea it was going to blossom into what it's become, and it's a
Yeah.
powerful force, a force for good within the organization. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Thanks, Brian.
soldier
Really
on.
appreciate it. And look forward to another 25 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the plan.
Okay. Well, very good having you with today. Thanks again.
Thanks, Andy.
And I'm going to click the stop button here for us. Thanks.
Very good.